Hello, everyone. Hi.
Hello.
Happy Thanksgiving to those of you who are in the United States.
Thanksgiving land.
Yeah, thanks. A slightly funky holiday, but what can one do? It used to be a harvest festival. Let's keep that abundance and the harvest in mind. Mm.
It's great to see you all.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Yeah, it's amazing that as soon as we kind of come on and see each other, there's something that starts to move, starts to deepen. And to be aware of that happening is takes it, deepens it even more. Is that your experience? Do you, yeah.
I always find it very fascinating to pay close attention how as soon as a group forms like this, and somehow it's even more obvious when you come on screen because it's so sudden. It's not just one is entering a room and others entering. All of a sudden you are face to face with 20 people. And when you pay attention how there is a consciousness field finding itself. And really, the field you're sitting in completely changes because of the presence of everyone. And just to be aware of that, there's something forming just by our presence. Just the fact that this is so, I always find very interesting.
Mm.
I sometimes wonder if I was not sighted, if I was blind and I was not able to see everyone, would that actually enhance my ability to experience that field because I would be working on other things than my sight.
It's true.
I sometimes wonder whether my sight both takes in everybody at the same time it limits the ways in which I'm taking you in because I'm focusing so much on the sight of the boxes.
Yeah.
That difference between a Zoom phone call and a Zoom sight call, I'm always intrigued by what my sight is offering me and what my sight is taking away from me.
I agree.
Yeah, it is it's different. And I know, I mean, we've done a lot of work on the phone, and because you have to listen very closely, because we often use our sight as a way of not listening, or that lessens our real attention, because it's like, oh yeah, I know Jonathan, I know Virginia, yeah, Sibylla, okay, I know there's a way in which we shut down on something, but when you don't have anything visual, you kind of are leaning in more and trying to hear and distinguish whose voice is that, or what is that, or you even start to lose the individual people and really focus much more on what's happening together. And it's can we maintain that level of attention with our screens on is part of what we're working, because of course when you come together in person, that becomes even more accentuated, the sense of all the different signals that we get from each other in terms of body language and appearance and so on and so forth. That can be a distraction to the recognition of someone's presence, of someone's beingness and being there. But these are all different modalities that we want to experiment with and explore this intersubjective capacity, our capacity to sense into the intersubjective in these different ways. And it's a good thing to explore that and experiment with it.
So in that sense, hello again, and it's great to see you all.
Mm-hmm. We wanted to start today with again explore with inviting you to share the difference that you experience and how you experience the difference between your, let's say, usual individuated self and transindividuation. When you start to lean into this intersubjective context, where do you experience something, or how do you experience the difference, or do you experience a difference? Where is it? What is the difference between one's locus, one's experience as an individual, that as one usually walks through life, and this opening to the intersubjective and the call to transindividuate? How is that experienced by you? What is that like?
I think for me, it it feels quieter. It feels like a quieter space of an ability to, I don't know, listen more deeply and quieten down, and not so much having to do something as to sort of put something out there as to be more receptive somehow. Sort of, listening more deeply, taking time to connect and quit sort of trying to make things happen so much. That's part of it anyway, it seems, for me.
For me, it feels like if I really open up into it, it takes me out of my head and more into listening with my heart in a way, and so it's this feeling of aliveness where it feels like hearing and communicating from a broader space than the singular space, but I perceive it in my body in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
For me, in my usual self, I feel my boundaries more strong than if I'm in the transindividual zone. There, I kind of, everything is somehow more blurred, more, and actually, it's made me think the introduction comments about the visual. I noticed that my visual sense is also less strong. Yeah, and it's more sensing from within, and probably, and I guess when I'm in my usual self, I'm more with my outer senses. I think that's how the difference is, the more my usual outer senses, or versus that all being having to be taken back a step, or more less significant in order to tap into the space between.
Yeah, I would
Go. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah. Okay. I would follow along with that. I like when you said the fuzziness, like there is a blurring. The words aren't as, I don't know, it's like, as soon as I want to try to say something, I go, no, and that's sort of the blurriness. It's like you want to be so careful and gentle, and the words that you choose, you want them to come forth, and it is more of it can be a hesitancy and more of an inquiry than a straightforward knowing kind of sense that we often have, but it's sometimes both of those. But I like the fuzziness, because I experience that a lot. Like, it's a good description of like trying to find, what's the word that you're trying to describe, we need to describe this bodily sensation that we're wanting to call forth as well.
Yeah, I find myself less inhibited in that way. Like, there's a strange balance between the intention of putting something out, which, to your point, could be like just plain curiosity, but there's not an agenda to it. It's a funny kind of balance, and just an openness. There was one observation I had, and I think most of us did in the group last week, that there was a moment we all, a few of us anyway, commented that we felt the energy change. It's hard to know exactly what caused that, and I don't want to like dissect it in a way, but the only thing I can think of is it seemed like it was the moment when most of us had said something and contributed in some way, but verbally. I don't know. I don't want to attribute something that's not there, but it was, I think most of us kind of felt something change, and we were closer and more tighter together.
Noticing when those shifts happen is in oneself, but also in the group, is a very important part of sensitizing oneself to these shifts, the changes in the intersubjective, from an interpersonal way of relating to something that starts to come from much more wholeness, and so it can be useful in your groups to say, aha, are we together in that something just changed right now? What is that? What's now opening up? That can be very useful.
Yeah, I also noticed that last week, and it was, I would say, it was a very instantaneous dropping of the energy, and that it went deeper, just kind of. And then for me, as I experience this, I feel much more embodied, and and I'm open at the same time. And I can sense the.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's and I think it goes back to that quality of beingness. We discovered in that one meditation.
I find it really interesting, the distinction you made, Deborah, when you said that it's embodied, but you feel open, because oftentimes our focus on embodiment and trying to become embodied and ends up having an intense focus on the self and one's experience and feelings. But this is an embodiment that is almost an access point to something much larger, and that is which is a very interesting thing, because it doesn't seem like this would lead to a greater sense of embodiment, and yet it does. There's a quality of aliveness that one experiences bodily and wholly, but it's not limited to oneself.
Which particular, when it's happening on screen, is a kind of a weird experience. Because, at least that's the way I would describe it, that in some way it makes sense that my bodily experience also includes you and my awareness of all of you. There's some space that I'm aware in my body awareness that holds the whole presence of us. And that my body experience is not limited to my physical body sitting here. And it's a little weird to talk about this in this way, but nevertheless, it is my experience that there is a bodily sensation of some space opening up that is held by all of us. And also, I think Virginia before said, or was it Diane, the silence that's opening, the silence that's opening up has a lot to do with my inner conversation kind of slowing down. Mm-hmm. Because in order to be together, I have to listen. And with the listening, I even mean more than just listening to the words. It's just listening to this shared space. Because I only become aware of the living wholeness that we are, to the degree that I open my senses. For that I have to kind of at least slow down my inner chatter. Because otherwise I have no clue that I'm with anyone. Basically, I maybe I'm in front of the screen, but basically I'm just with me and my inner whatever. So in order to open up, I have to slow down with the inner conversation. And there's a awareness of a wholeness that definitely goes beyond myself. And there's something that I can relate to, but I don't really know what it is. And part of this always fascinating experience is that there is something alive. I don't know what it is, and as we are talking together, it's forming itself. And that brings me also very much to this moment, because being with myself, I'm very used to myself, and I have my ideas and my history and all that. But this, whatever this is, only gets birthed in this moment where we are right now. And this makes this moment also so fresh together. There's something where the freshness of coming together is really a body sensation, because it's dependent on all of us where we go with this. So if we don't pay attention to the shared moment right now, this, whatever this is, will never happen. And that's what makes this transindividuated presence, I would say, just a very alive experience, because it doesn't work otherwise. It's just we won't meet otherwise, or this won't meet otherwise. And it's definitely beyond my ideas. I have to pay attention.
Yeah, we talked about that in our last group meeting. Just this kind of ended up this question of.
Could you speak a little louder, Matthew? You're a little low.
Oh, yeah. Let's see if I can turn this up. Yeah, in our last meeting, we kind of ended on this question of trust, and how there seems to be this important quality of trust that exists that allows this to become possible. That it's not entering into some kind of space together that's already there, but it's one that we participate in creating, and that it really requires us to engage deeply with this sense of trust and openness, and that it's a very active, creative engagement that requires
everyone to, all of us to kind of be there, to show up in that kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I was wondering with that is, like, within that process of kind of surrendering into this space of aliveness that's happening moment by moment, where there's, in a way, it's not a contained, defined sort of safe space in that we know what's going to happen. It requires us to surrender our sense of self, in a sense, in order to experience it. And so what is it within that in fact creates this increase of trust? And so I was just curious about that, because I could feel that. I could feel the trusting happening more, right, as we went deeper into it, and people were being more and more courageous in what they were allowing to come through spontaneously. And so I was just curious about what it is that's creating that. That sense of trust.
That's an awesome question.
Mm.
That's a really interesting question. Did you have a take on it?
Yeah. That I think one thing that's definitely related to this is a very simple fact: trust is needed. Because what we're doing together, as you're describing it, is very interdependent. We need each other. This, if I may use this, whatever it is, this only can happen when we allow it to happen together. That means we are completely dependent on each other. If we don't trust each other, it for sure can't happen. So if there's any kind of intention for this to emerge, trust is needed. And for that, my experience is that I'm willing to risk trust. And then when trust seems to work, because it's working, because we seem to be trustworthy, there's no one basically who wants to destroy this in any kind of way, or just being in a way pulling it down, being destructive. If you find out it works, we are trustworthy, then trust can relax and go further with it. But it starts with the recognition that there's something possible between us, but without trust, it won't happen. And I find this is what creates the pull to, I really want to trust because this is a potential I don't want to miss. And then, because trust has also to be trustworthy, because there's also kind of a stupid trust that you don't want to have. But when you see, wow, there's a trustworthy circle here that really allows something to unfold, then the trust can really bloom in that. And this, I'm just making up as I'm talking, but I find it comes first from this desire, and then from the recognition that this circle seems to be trustworthy. And then something can open up and go further, and then we can push it further and further. How far can we go with this?
I think this is really hard to kind of open up here, because I think that it's when one experiences trust in this fundamental way, because we're talking about trust in the stuff of existence. We're talking about trust in the presence of life and aliveness, which is consciousness. That when someone gives that, it opens something up for all of us. And then there is a reciprocal building of that. Mm. That trust itself, what trust is I think something quite mysterious. It's actually, I think trust is so aligned with sacredness, so aligned with the mystery itself, that it is almost another word for a kind of heartfelt awareness of consciousness. It is almost that. Trust is the risk of presence. And when we risk presence with each other, that presence that is not separate between us, it's not my presence and your presence, it is presence. When that presence is then spoken to, given life, breathed into, shared, it's something that then deepens for all of us. And it's as I said, I find it quite we're dealing with something that's at the core of what life is, and is very mysterious. But what's amazing is that we can engage with it, though. That it's possible to engage with and to see, that how this can build. And when you have a trustworthy group, as Thomas was saying, that it keeps building, and that even if someone is not quite there, that there's not that there's still an intention towards being with it, and that makes a huge difference. There's not a desire to destruct or destroy or to hold out, or that there's a willingness.
Seems like you're talking now. It sounds like we're talking about a resonance field that just keeps on building.
Yeah.
I must say that when I hear the word trust, I'm kind of feeling, it kind of brings me back into my individuated self, and it feels like kind of, this is almost an outcome of something. After experiencing something, I can think, okay, trust was there. That's what allowed it to happen. It's kind of an intellectual way of analyzing the situation, how it feels to me. And what I'm noticing is each time I'm coming into this group, either our smaller group or this group, might sound a little weird, but or maybe it's to do with what I'm reading recently, but I kind of feel not here as an I or as my individual. I kind of have a greater sense of all of the cells in my body. And I can almost feel them tingling. So kind of more of a vibrational sense of being here than I generally have. And so I don't have an I to decide I'm being trustful. It's kind of all of these billions of cells or whatever floating around in a vibrational, not floating around, but kind of more alive than in normal time.
Yeah. And I agree with you about, it's not like one enters a context like this and says, okay, now I'm going to trust. It is that kind of afterwards one recognizes that one had an experience of trust that was surprising or special or different.
Yeah, there seems to be also a valuable mixture of utter lack of judgment with deep penetrating curiosity. And so often the penetrating curiosity is mixed into intellectual judgment or naming things. Oh, this is this, not that. And so if I say this, will I be thought of as being absurd, and it won't be named correctly? I will be judged and found wanting. So I can't trust this space. But what I find really unique about this sort of exploration is I don't like the word rigorous because it comes from rigor mortis and stiffness, but in the way that term is usually used to mean sort of intellectual, dynamism and real careful attention to something, that deep curiosity, but like I don't experience a judgment from anybody. Maybe I'm missing it, right? But so I'm happy to say I feel unjudged. But and at that moment, I feel like, I start there's some weird mixture, release of the interpersonal. I think Hannah's question is a really profound one, because I'm in so many other places where so many people experience a profound lack of trust and cannot release themselves into the subjective because the interpersonal is feeling too judged. It can't move. And so I think it's a profound question to ask how trust is created. And somehow there's this wonderful, when you were just saying earlier, can you attend and attune to when there's a shift in a small group to when suddenly you're in that space? Yeah, that's very careful, tactile attention, but nobody's trying to judge anybody else or critique somebody else's argument. It's just a beautiful shared, what was that? Did you experience that? And there's a playfulness, but a seriousness to the playfulness that's really quite beautiful. That seems essential for the trust in the way that Hannah was getting in.
What's interesting, and I think this will make sense to you of probably your experience at the university in some way, that what is called for in transindividuation is that we let go of our identities. We let go of.
Good luck. They're so hard fought,
That's right. That's why this is really a next step in culture, and you can see what is lined up against it happening, because people have, because one has fought so much for one's identity as a woman, as a person of color, as a man, more and more, that to say we want you to hold that lightly and not make that the center of who you are, because there is something much bigger that you actually are, that includes that, but you have to let go of it a bit. That is very, it's scary and also sometimes outrageous. Met with rage, I mean. Yeah.
I don't mean to shift it, but what I worry so much is that for many folks, that comment seems to leave white people off the hook who haven't done any work.
That's right.
To unpack whiteness. So to suddenly start to speak of a larger consciousness seems to let white people go right on through as if there's nothing to attend to about whiteness.
That's right.
That's a whole different conversation. I don't know, suddenly I'm off something else but that's complicated.
Yep.
And really problematic in conversations. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I just say one thing. That's why we're doing One World Bearing Witness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks for everybody. This is really helpful.
There's also one entry point to what you're bringing up, Jonathan, that I find particularly difficult in academic context, but not only. Because one's identification with our also intellectual identity, it's very difficult to realize that beyond or before these identities, we are already together in something. And this kind of undividedness, just let's say by our humanness, just by being in the same room, that there's something that we are together already because we are together here, that can be honored. Because it doesn't even need the absence of judgment. It only needs that something is more important than judgment. That there's something where we are together in something that we don't want to fall apart. That there's some dialogical space that is alive, that is a living reality, that doesn't want to kind of fracture in conflict, but can hold tension without falling apart. For that, one needs a sensitivity of this alive wholeness that we are together in already, and to honor this. And in that, of course, intellectual judgment can be. In fact, it's very interesting if there's kind of also tension, and we can talk about tensions, that because the other side is if we're just in harmony, something very flat and flattened can emerge, where we don't dare to have any opinion about anything or any controversy about anything anymore, because we want to protect this kind of thing. But from my point of view, it becomes most interesting when both is possible, but there's an honoring of something that we are together in already that is a living wholeness. But for that, you need to have a reference point. And usually as an intellectual, it's very hard to have a reference point there, because your reference point is in the world of ideas and in the world of my ego identity. So it's basically my competitive identity and my identity of my concepts. And to have an awareness that there's something that has not touched by any of them is, particularly in academic context, not very often accessible.
Mm-hmm. But that's the prior unity that we were speaking about last time. That this recognition that there is something before even we came on the screen together, before we began to engage, that we were already together in something. And as we begin to engage, the fact that there is a living wholeness between, that is a prior unity, a prior wholeness to life itself, to the entire life process, and also to our part of it, which is here between each other. It's that aspect of transindividuation that allows us to kind of re-own the truth of non-separation from a very from a different place, I would say, and the argument for, and I'm using the word argument intentionally, that the argument that prior unity is real is something that one can make very rationally, and in terms of cosmology, evolution, if you will, and also as a what we're talking about here as a sensing experience, as an experience of our connection to an increasing awareness of the dimensions of consciousness and living that are not separate, that we are not separate from, and that we are together in already. And that's that is why that prior unity is a foundation for transindividuation, and makes then this intersubjective engagement possible.
Yeah, I'm wondering, as I'm thinking about that, like, to me, it almost feels like rather than moving towards completely dissolving the individual identity, it almost feels like as everyone is starting to rely, and that trust is building, and there is that opening and the willingness to surrender into the moment or into the aliveness, it almost feels like the individual identities are deepened by the context of the wholeness. Mm-hmm. So they get to remain in their uniqueness at the same time as there's an opportunity to discover more of oneself as one feels the connection to the whole. Mm-hmm. So it's like they get to stay and get larger at the same time, or get more dissolved at the same time.
The price between the first one of hanging on to one's identity and the discovering one's identity in a context of much of wholeness that gives one a different access and awareness of one's unique contribution is the letting go. And that ends up being a bit of a free fall, or a feeling of free fall when you're standing in that identity and holding on to it for dear life, that it feels like you're being asked to jump out of an airplane without a parachute. But it's true what you're saying, that as a result of, or in that surrender, there is something that one becomes, again, only afterwards often aware of, a sense of being more at home, deeply at home, and also that one has something to contribute from who one is at a level that one didn't even know that one had, really.
Right. It's like it's almost like free falling into a collective flow state of some sort. Yeah.
That's what's coming up for me around trust, is this idea that I can enter into a group where I'm open to blending with that group, and yet that I'm trusting that I won't lose myself in that group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about transindividuation, which we've been saying is beyond being individuated, which means you don't lose it. It means that it's based on the capacity for choice that you just said, Andy. I'm choosing to be in this group and to engage in this way, and that choice itself is the gem of individuation. I choose.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an essential feature of what we're speaking about.
And there's something tricky with this, because our individuated self sense has a strong desire that is very simple. I want to hold on to myself. And there's something that pre-individuation and transindividuation both have in common. It's free of myself, of my separate self. There's a freedom of it. It's a different form of freedom, but there's a freedom where I have to let go into something that I don't know. So the trust that we are talking about is also the trust in something mysterious I don't know. And from the perspective of my separate self-sense, that's pretty scary. Because in some way I have to let go and have to develop some trust in something I don't know what it is. And that can feel also like, oh, wait a moment, I'm regressing, I'm losing myself. And sometimes that's also the case. But there's something where I don't lose my sense of responsibility. That's, I think, the most positive part of my individuated self-sense, that whatever has happened, that I am responsible I am responsible for my participation. There's no way that I am not responsible for what I'm doing right now. And this responsibility is always me in my individuated form. There is no other place for responsibility than my individual sense. There's no collective responsibility. There's only individual responsibility. But there can be a collective individual responsibility to open up to something that is mysterious together. And then something is opening up that is beyond holding on to my identity. There's a shared space of consciousness opening up that kind of has its own qualities, also its own potential, and we are kind of going together with this. And this is, on one hand, very exciting, but on the other hand, also kind of scary to go there. And that's what makes this transindividuation more than just, okay, there's a thing going on between us and let's do it together, but I stay my same. No, I don't stay my same. That I have to let go of something. And that's why this is also really a shift in consciousness that needs guts to go there.
There's something that keeps coming up for me in this about belonging. Like, the individual also has a strong need to belong to something. And I've been reflecting about the contrast between this experience and how it is just to be kind of in the larger societies, specifically the larger national society in the political arena, where there's so much tribalism. I mean, and that's a sort of an answer to the need to belong in a way, but there's this mixture of tribalism and individualism that actually seems kind of toxic in a way. And the only I mean, this thing that we're trying to do here seems like, in terms of development, like the only way out of that almost, or maybe it is the only way out of it. And I guess the concern that keeps coming up for me is that, we're such a small group of people here trying to do this.
Yeah, it seems to me like we could experiment, theoretically speaking, with conflict, like just that mention of the word identity. And it could, how strong can we make this sense of being here together and still not necessarily agree with what other people are saying.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it seems like that is maybe possible, but that would take a lot more practice.
I agree.
But that's what we want to get strong enough to be able to do. because being able to really be a portal for or carry this and into all kinds of different contexts is more and more critical because of this tribalism, as you're saying, and the tribalism has very real existential reasons for being, and that's something that we can't skip over.
And also, Deborah, what you're bringing, I think, is the most interesting part of all of it. Because when this kind of going beyond oneself allows to hold friction, so that I really I don't understand what you're saying, or I strongly disagree with what you're saying, but there's something in our dialogical space that holds this, where I'm still interested in what you're saying, and you are still interested in what I am saying. And I really don't like it, or I really hate it, but I don't separate, because there's something where we can push together in this. And this is really also my experience, sometimes is exactly the point of the highest creativity. Somehow, all of a sudden, because of these different perspectives, not kind of breaking apart, but holding together, there's a third option opening up, that it really allows to hold conflict in a way that I think only this form of dialogical space can really hold. But what really makes it happen is this not falling apart in this.
I was saying, or one other thing that we've seen is there's still maybe misunderstanding, and also at a level of position or whatever, still be real difference and not togetherness. But because of this other dimension of where of being together, as Thomas was saying, that there one comes out of the conversation with human respect, and that already is a big change.
I'm wondering if this has something to do, there's a few things I'm going to try to pull together here, but being in service to something larger than this individuated self. And the other thing is that when I come to these dialogues, I'm always coming with two things present. One is some kind of an excitement, or something is so attractive or attracting or compelling in dialogue that it just, I seem to have to move towards it. I want to move towards it. And at the same time, it is really quite scary, because I don't know that I am up to what is going to be asked of me.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that, and then there is this, I don't even know, can't even name for sure what it is that I am surrendering to. So there's a I guess it has to do with that shift of from the safe place of I know who I am to falling. It's not even just falling, it is choosing to let go into something that feels like I can trust it and yet is really scary. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I've made any sense in there, but there's just a whole bunch of things that seem to be coming together. It's about remembering and forgetting at the same time, and being excited about and being afraid of, and choosing to do and allowing to happen. So just a lot of things happening at once.
Mm-hmm. I think that very much relates to what the scheduled topic is for today, which is about transindividuation and intention. Because I think what you're speaking about is, if you this realization of prior unity and what it calls forth, which is often a softness, a sense of sacredness, a sense of trust, as we were saying, or sense of this beyondness that is compelling, that one feels a need to protect or a desire to protect. That then, what is one's intention? How do we shift our personal intention, which is the part that gets scared and so on and so forth, to align with the intention of this momentum, this thing that pulls? How do we do that? Or that's the important next step.
Something that's coming up for me is I sort of wonder, like, everything that Virginia has just said, it feels really, and what everybody else is saying feels so important. But I wonder sometimes, like I'm wondering right now, if the emphasis that we have sometimes on the fear, how fearful it is really, really warranted. Because it seems like we've reinforced that an awful lot, that it's a scary experience. And I agree, I think it is. It feels that like it's scary. But on the other hand, if that is put out there, even in my experience, it's gone, because that trust that's there, that non-judgmentalism, and that not worrying about what the individual is, including myself, thinking about and scared about, and it's just put out there. There's this kind of, and the word that I really appreciated was something Matthew used, this kind of grace. It's like it's a graceful place that can hold these little self-concerns once they're put out there, and it just disappears. There's no, it's like, oh, that was so silly, feeling so scared, or I don't even remember feeling scared, or whatever. So I just want to throw that out there too.
Well, that's true, Diane, because I feel when we have the strength to do what you're doing, it needs strength and trust to do that. Then there's a chance for something opening up in our shared awareness. That is, I would call it the potential of our shared field. Where does this conversation as a whole want to go? No, not where do I want to go in this conversation, but because I am just holding all that what you're describing, and I'm just staying attentive. I'm interested. What's opening up between us? Somewhere in my awareness, there is a hint of an awareness of a potential of what's unfolding between us. And in that, awareness of what's unfolding between us, I can be of service for that. And in the way that we together, in our own way, start to respond to this, there's something opening up that's not my intention where I want to go, not your intention where you want to go in this conversation, but it's coming out of our shared attentiveness where the whole conversation wants to go. And that the creative potential comes from the space in between. And the intention is an intention that comes from a very unknown place. And it's an ongoing, always finding out where does this whole thing want to go. And I have to really be very careful to not just put my intention on top of it and say, hey, this is where you want to go. But at the same time, I also not to hold myself back and say, I'm just waiting what's going to happen. It's not up to me. I have to put myself in there. But in that, something is emerging that is beyond us as individuals, but is something that is a shared intention, that is coming from a very unknown place between us. And when we talk about transindividuation and intention, this is what I find most exciting. This intention is opening up that is not coming from someone particular, but coming from the whole.
I'd also like to say something to the fear, to the scariness. What's important, I think it's what you were pointing to, Diane, is to know when that comes up, what part of oneself it's coming from. You know, it's like, oh, this is my small self going like, eek, help, where am I here? Wait a second. But that paying attention, which is what Thomas was saying, to this putting all of, even though that may be sort of yelling somewhere back here, putting one's attention on something different, which is this thing that pulls, as Virginia was saying, this thing that pulls us and says, wow, there's something really here, I don't know what it is. And becoming interested in that potentiality, it can drop away. You shift into some other place. It's often a sign that the fear when it rises is a sign of that shift being in process. But it's important to understand what it is and to make room for it rather than trying to override it. Because when we say, "Oh, that's not it," or I'm not afraid, often that means that we are putting our own agenda and our own self-image. I'm somebody who doesn't get afraid about these things, on top of something on top of what is a very delicate process. And that's why they both often have to be there. Or if fear arises, it arises, and one's attention is consciously given to something bigger and deeper, and that is the choice of surrender.
It also, I'm thinking right now that having that awareness, that witnessing aspect of ourselves, so that when we pull back, something is said that we don't like, say, and then we pull back from the group, or that we have I don't know, it's like a real high level self-awareness that we're giving to this process, because then our responsibility is just be able to notice what we're doing with our own energy field.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm wondering, is it better than to share that out loud for the group? I mean, I just noticed that I was pulling back, and then, or just to not say anything.
I wouldn't be able to to make a general rule here, because I think the answer again comes from a different place. The answer comes from our attentiveness, what wants to emerge between us. And then sometimes this may be helpful, but sometimes it may be not helpful at all, because it pulls the attention to one's personal space. So this is part of the delicacy of this process, that the answer does not come from this kind of rules that I can make. It comes of paying attention to this thing that wants to emerge, this potentiality of where does this conversation really want to go? And sometimes this is very clear and bright, and the attention stays there very obviously. Sometimes the conversation can be very meandering, and it's not clear where it wants to go, and it needs our active participation for it to really unfold in its direction and in its intention. But that's exactly what makes a conversation alive in that sense, when we are together in this finding out that needs our active leaning in. And at the same time, it leads a lot of not knowing, a lot of just what wants to emerge here right now. Where do we want to go? What's the potential of this group, this conversation, this wherever we are in right now? And in this collective finding out, usually conversation finds its way.
That just totally makes me think of the classic, the path and the goal are one.
Mm.
You know, how we normally engage in, well, not just conversation, but almost anything. We have some kind of goal in mind, and then we figure out, okay, what's the path to get there? What's the structure I need? What are the boundaries I have to follow? What are the rules that will help me get there, you know, in the most efficient way, or the most, so I arrive at some final place. But in this kind of way of being, it's like, oh, the goal really is just to be able to be in this way, and then see where it goes. And that's, it's just this radical kind of inversion of the way, you know, I normally tend to relate to so many different aspects of life, that there's no way of trying to, I mean, I can see the temptation all the time to want to find some kind of boundary, so I can be able to be able to feel somehow more, to create some kind of space where I'm able to feel more objective and feel maybe even just less vulnerable, or to remove some discomfort, and then seeing that that's taking me somewhere else, and that's bringing me away from this kind of the dynamic of what's emerging, and that it seems like the only way is to just keep leaning into it without really knowing, and continuing to not know where I'm going, but continue to take those steps somehow.
I have a question about, I mean, I find this way of experimenting and exploring and moving forward really exciting. And in this group, it's great to have the opportunity to try this here and to work with it. And I wonder about, you know, taking it to an outside space where, I mean, what I'm wondering is, does it need, what would I say, a shared, between the people in conversation, does it need that people have shared that we want to explore in this way together, that we're moving beyond our individual, I mean, you know, or moving into a dialogue type space, even if it's not using that terminology, but using what's behind it. And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, if I were to try and explore it without having it set up in this way where we know we're in a shared space, Is there something to be careful about, or should I just go try it and see what happens? Or hear your guidance on that.
Interesting enough, what comes to my mind is the same what I said before. It just means something very different here. It's the interest. What is the real potential of that conversation that you are in? Because if, let's say, no one else is interested in this kind of conversation that you're describing, or the conversation that we have right now, you're in a very different situation. And when I'm in this different situation, do I respect that I'm in this situation? And I'm interested, what's the potential there? It's a different potential. There's something we can create in the conversation where all of us are interested in creating this transindividuated space, let's call it that way. But if we are in situations like most situations where people just whatever want to have their normal kind of conversations, do I respect that this is the conversation that I'm in, and what is the potential of this? It's different. And I had a very interesting conversation yesterday in a German course that we gave with someone who is doing this work for a couple of years. And she was describing, she was with a group of friends for a couple of days that have no connection to this work at all. Mm-hmm. And she spent a couple of days all day together. They were all friends and they had all kind of connections, but not this connection together. And she was very excited to talk about this because she felt, because of her focus point on this potential, something was possible between them that the others were not even aware of. And she didn't put anything on them. She just was basically bringing herself and her open interest into this conversation, and something opened up that everyone felt as very intimate, very open, very alive. And she, exactly, at least it was her interpretation, said that because she was able to hold a space for everyone in this, was able to catalyze something that was different than a conversation where everyone has a conscious intention to hold this kind of emergent dialogue. It was a very different, but something was possible because she had the strength and the openness to be there for whatever was possible there. And she was very excited about that because she felt what she's learning here had a huge contribution to a situation that was completely different, but it had an implication there. So yes, it's very different. And I sometimes like to make the distinction between an explicit dialogue and an implicit dialogue. And we basically, when we have an agreement that we want to hold and create this space together, we can explicitly hold this. But in any kind of circumstance, I can be there for something that allows a different potential to open up, to be a catalyst without forcing anything. Just see what's possible here. And because my interest and my focus, but sometimes there's an open door and nobody walks through because nobody sees it. And if you walk through it, something is opening up for everyone. And it's even not very obvious why this happened, but something is very different because someone is holding a space for something. In that sense, I feel what we are doing has a relevance for all kinds of circumstances, but one has to make really a different differentiation between when we consciously are doing this together or having respect when we are in different situations where people have different intentions of having a conversation.
I think of course, the importance of having a space like this where we're all working towards this is that you get what the experience actually is. You know, what is it that you realize, oh, there is actually something between human beings that we can aim for, and begin to understand how to align with that in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you're just in, you know, with people who are not interested in this. But you can now the deeper one is able to surrender, open to this, and be a catalyst for it, the more then all these other dimensions and conversations in your life can be seen for, can be seen in a new way, I think. As Thomas said, with respect for the possibility that they each hold, which will be different from this one or this context, because the point of this context is for everyone to develop the sensorium and understanding to be able to start a process of transindividuation that can bring the intersubjective alive between us.
But I think it's
No,
something
continue.
to do with being. I think it's something to do with. Can you hear?
Yes.
It's a little, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. So I just think it's something to do with being conscious of what the purpose, well, a purpose of conversation can be. Just for example, something happened last night in a family situation where we had a kind of big family gathering, and I noticed that and there were two kind of generations there, and the conversation was about Brexit, and there was, to and fro, and quite an animated discussion about that. But I was just much more aware that this is how things move, these kind of conversations, how they're kind of these invisible interactions are making history. And I talked to some of the people in the family and saying, wow, we've got two generations here, and we are this is making history. They were quite tuning into the conversation, and I don't know, somehow we all became aware that this conversation was not, it's not just words. It was there was something tangible and creative about the conversation itself, rather than just too much focusing on who thought what about Brexit. There was something that opened up a possibility of actually contemplating what we were doing, and what that conversation opened up for, how it would be remembered, because I know, it was quite an important family gathering, and it will be, some of it will be remembered and passed, and kind of sense of history. We're making this, and a kind of, I think there was a bit more of a less focus on what our held opinions were, and just marveling at what was happening.
Yeah, one kind of guideline that we sometimes offer is to realize that every conversation is part of a larger conversation. Every dialogue is part of a larger dialogue. And even these family gatherings where generations are speaking, and there are these very, very deep differences of opinion, position, life experience, that's part of this dialogical process is part of the movement of humanity, the struggle of humanity towards something. And even just being able to have a larger frame on one's conversations opens up something. But I think, shall we?
Maybe before we move into the groups, just one thing, which is kind of a philosophical remark, so excuse me for that. But I find it very helpful to think about this also in relation, Alison, to your conversation. And it's the relationship between intention and openness. Because the way I think about it, and what I find helpful to think about, is that if we really pay attention in a very open way, what is the potential of a certain situation that I'm in? What is really the potential? Not with the idea that I have, but finding out together what's possible here right now. In that finding out, something usually emerges. And the interesting thing is that the potential is not neutral. A potential that we recognize is not just, hey, I'm a potential and this is it. A potential has in itself a calling. It wants to become real. A potential wants to manifest. So there's something where in this open listening and in this collective finding out what the potential of a conversation is, there is an intention forming because something is calling as a possibility between us to emerge. And to be there for this is an intention that is coming from a unified space. It's coming from a place beyond us. And in some way, you could say this is the evolutionary impulse itself.
Eros.
And it's not someone making up, they're finding out what is possible between us. They're wanting to know what's the potential between us in this conversation. Just the question in itself is part of it. And to have this attentiveness to stick together and find out and see this also, as Elizabeth was saying, that any conversation is not without context. Every conversation is in the context of a bigger conversation, of a bigger conversation, of a bigger conversation. The conversation that we are having here right now is in the context of this course that we are having. The course is in the context of something that is a field that we call a kind of a movement to find out what this V-space is possible for the evolution of consciousness and culture right now. This is happening in a certain time that we are living in a certain time of history. This is happening in the whole of human development. And you even can go to the development of cosmos if you want to really make it big up. So where is this conversation that we are having right now wanting to go? And in that, we find out that the movement of consciousness always has an intention. It always wants to go somewhere. And a part of where we can be an active agent of that is in holding this openness between us and holding this interest in our shared potential so that this can happen. Just wanted to
add that. Great. Why don't we maybe the groups can be sort of in that direction.
Yeah.
Do you want to frame that as a question, and then we can set up the groups?
I just wanted to add something really quickly. I'm just getting a real awareness in myself of how being in this field right now, and I related to the family thing too, of what it feels like, that I'm feeling like I've got I'm just getting a personal massage from this energy.
Mm.
And it's making me realize how important it is for us as humans to share this space with each other in this kind of way, that there's like a really deep need for this.
Thank you.
Yes. What I was realizing, how when I was watching the videos of the other classes, how the time would go really fast for me, and I'd ask myself, well, we're not really talking about anything. How come I'm not bored? And it feels so good just on a physical level for me to just be in this.
No, thank you.
There is a healing back into a wholeness in this process that I think is very, very profound and kind of never ending.
And maybe if you want to talk in these groups, how is this relationship between this openness that we were talking about the whole hour before now, in an emergent potential that's emerging between us that wants to go somewhere? How is this that out of this openness something is emerging that has a direction, that has an impulse to move? That's not just, oh, this is great, let's hang out here. No, it really has a direction, has an intention, or has a movement forward. How is this possible? To happen not by I bringing an intention into our conversation, I want to go somewhere, but somehow emerging exactly out of this open attentiveness that we are holding together. This is a talking point. I think that would be very, very interesting to talk about. All right.
Okay. So we'll have the groups until 1:45, and then come back and talk about hear what happened and anything that arises from that. Okay. Is that okay? Okay. Cool.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Where'd you go?
Yeah, curious.
I'd say we didn't go anywhere. We just stayed in the present moment. That was our intention. To be in the moment with each other.
And I need to remark that the being so present in the moment with that group was an incredible feeling of being at home. There was a very energetically felt sense of belonging there, and kind of being seen, being an integral part of that space. And it just felt like, why would I ever want to be someplace else but in that moment?
Which doesn't mean we didn't go somewhere. I think.
Yeah.
Because I think we had some even small maybe recognitions of intention. What intentions means and where it could be perceived, and we were talking about openness, where openness is coming from. That it really means, it needs, as far as I understand it, the transindividuated self to be perceived as the intention of Eros itself. And Catherine was bringing in that we invest so much energy to turn around ourselves. She was, I don't remember the word anymore, what you said about the river and the huh?
It was an eddy, like a little eddy of water in the river. Like
What's eddy in German?
Strudel?
Yeah, Strudel.
Strudel.
River.
Yeah. How much energy we use and spend to be in this life eddy, and then really can decide or can choose to step into the to jump in the big river where we never know where it's leading us to.
Yeah.
So I think it was very interesting, and at the end we had the deep recognition of the unlimited presence of the present moment, and
That's sometimes exactly where this process wants to go.
Yeah.
I find the image of the eddy that kind of spins on itself versus the stream to be really interesting, because often our individual intentions and motivations keep coming back to ourselves, right? They're self-reinforcing and sort of I want for me, kind of around in a circle. But this other intention that when Thomas was speaking about the intention that comes from following this potentiality, this possibility that opens, is a very different stream, and it feels unstuck from that eddy.
And yet they are the same. Like the eddy has to be within the river itself, so they're not separate. So That's interesting too.
You're talking about holding, the idea of holding space in this process, and just how it, I think it allows kind of a higher vibration to emerge from the group, and that, yeah, that event, that you're not dealing with just what the group, the composition of our individuals and what we know, but there is something greater that is allowed to come in then.
Can I say the last bit again? I'm not sure.
There was something greater or bigger or newer is allowed to come in, or
when
be
you're holding it.
Yeah.
Be recognized. Yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense.
We said it feels like a birthing process. So, and sometimes it feels it demands something. It demands something from us, from me, but it's very joyful.
We talked a lot of, somehow it came up, a lot of qualities, childlike qualities of, in this sense of openness and just curiosity, and yeah, and even that kind of, that joyfulness and being open to wonder and awe, you know, that there's something, but also with the sense of, which, you know, children don't necessarily always have, is that sense of patience and the willingness to just wait and be attentive. And so it seems like, yeah, there's this sense of lightness and yeah, these qualities where it doesn't feel so heavy, and yet there's this waiting and this interest in seeing kind of what comes forward, and even in the sense of direction. When it, you know, I was thinking too, or what kind of came to the surface was just in the moment, it doesn't, the direction isn't even clear. It's just a sense of movement. It's just like something's happening, and then, you know, I can't really get a handle on any kind of direction until, you know, in hindsight, reflecting on it, or but there's just like, oh, something is moving. There's something that's not just perfectly still, or at least is some different quality than just being in that stillness.
I think we also spoke about there's some kind of peaceful quality to it, and probably because we're kind of in a more unified sense of who we really are when we're working in this kind of way, and because we're in this way of being, it's already healing, and that's a very peaceful place to be, and from which to operate from. Or to operate is the wrong word, but from which to contribute from, something like this.
It's part of why I find it so joyful to do this dialogues ongoingly since years. It really feels just to come together in this different place is something very joyful, powerful, and meaningful. And without knowing all the time where this wants to go, it just feels significant that we can meet this way. Somehow it seems this is important that people do this. It is something that's not just, hey, that's great, we're doing this. It feels, no, this is important. This is important, and this means something for how we can be together as humans. I find it a very powerful way of relating to each other.
It's kind of just coming to my mind right now to how so much of our time we're operating from a fragmented sense of who we are.
Yeah.
And we're in this space, we're bringing so much more. And maybe expecting less, but bringing more, I don't know.
For me, what comes up with that is this feeling that that this is who we really are, and that our typical individuated state is just this this fragment of understanding that we've had in as human beings for a long time, but that that this is scratching the surface of whether it's a remembering, which is maybe how it feels familiar, but just it really is coming into an alive embodiment or awareness of maybe our just a deeper sense of our true nature, which feels really beautiful.
I can feel such a big tension because our group didn't speak. And we started with this question from Jonathan. From Jonathan, I hope I can say it. If this is another kind, our work is another kind of a kind of fascism we do for us. And this, it was like a shock. I heard this word, fascism, and we worked on it this 20 minutes, but so intense. And it was so nice to see that I can also look now with laughed eyes on Jonathan. It was so great because this conversation and this space could hold all of this experience of badness and fascism and war and KZ and murder things, and this was so great to experience it. I think, I don't hope that it destroys this discussion, but it's important to say this.
Yeah, just there was a really just beautiful. So some movement around. If someone earlier mentioned grace, and if all is grace, everything is here. So that we were speaking about choices and whether it's not really a choice between good and evil or bad and good, but to allow or exclude or something like that, to stay and attend or to shut something down and reject it. That there was a quality that we just had this conversation where everybody kept staying, everybody just attended to what was emerging. And it was just this really exploration of what was, it was, let's see, some real attentiveness to be on the edge of like smoke rising, like steam coming out of something, and wanting to sniff it, smell it, feel it on your skin, understand it in your prefrontal cortex, let it go all the way through your, down into your toes. So it's like to really get deep into the steam of it and the sensualness of it, and then try and find some random words to attend to this question we were working on. But so thank you, everybody. It was really
Cool.
some boundary dissolving.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can add too much more to what we did. It took great courage, I think, and a certain trust in some unnameable goodness for me to be able to not just kind of shut down in fear that all was lost in regards to this intersubjective we space, that I felt I was drawing on skill that I didn't really have. And I think for me, all of this was helpful. I won't name all the contributions, but Ken bringing in context of the national context and how our dialogue was related to something that we are living now. And for me also the potential of hopeful potential, and then the present becomes really important. Staying in the present, everything is full of the most beautiful potential. And when you contract into fear, I had less access to that beautiful potential. So it was an amazingly wonderful exercise that I'm so proud that all of us did. Thank you all. It was incredible.
Wow.
Well,
great.
What you're bringing up right now, Regina, reminds me of something that do you know Brother Steindl Rust, this Benedictine monk? He's quite a powerful figure. He's one of the Christian mystics right now that I respect the most, and I had the fortune to do an interview with him a couple of years ago. We do have him, by the way, also next week in our One World Bearing Witness event, which I'm very happy. And he said something that stuck with me, and when you said what you said, it brought it back to me. He said, "Oh, you know what is the most important message of the Bible?" And he said, usually you think it's something like love your how you say,
love your neighbor as yourself.
As yourself. He said that's not true. The one sentence that's most used in the Bible, in the New Testament, is "do not fear." He said that's the whole message of the Bible. Do not fear.
Wow.
He said that's really when you look what are the Jesus sentences that he uses most. This is the most used sentence by Jesus in the Testament. He says that for him, he's a Benedictine monk. He's 92 right now. He's a beautiful man. He said this is the whole message, because then his teaching is very much about being grateful. The gratefulness but because gratefulness allows you to respond. When you're grateful for the present moment, you're free to respond in fully to the present moment in gratefulness. And I think just to be there and have the strength to not fear, And then things come together in this.
And to pay attention, as you were saying.
Exactly.
And to fear, but not to fear the fear somehow. I was really afraid, but I was not afraid some other way.
Powerful.
When I hear that, line now, do not fear, I don't see it as, try to stamp down your fear or that type of thing, but it's like a reassurance.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's just calling on what we talked before. It's calling on trust.
Mm.
The way I understand it's the same like trust. There's reason to trust.
There is reason to trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or
yeah.
What I have heard, and I like it very much, is that the opposite of fear is love.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you can feel that very strongly right now. Mm.
We just leave it.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you very, very much. I hope you'll be with us next weekend. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be something.
It'll be powerful.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.